Hey everybody! Today I'm going to be reading a chapter from the book I'm working on right now. It's called Haunted Souls, and it's by Kathryn Knight, and I think it's pretty swell. A little backstory. We've got our heroine named Emily, and our hero named Brett, and they kind of had a fling back when Emily was in college, right before he went off to EOD school, and he had no idea, but she got pregnant during said fling. And she has just recently told him that they have a son whose name is Tyler, and they are kind of dealing with, the logistics behind being a family, sort of, kind of. And in the middle of all of this, she's pretty sure that she picked up a ghost at a haunted tour. So we've got the paranormal romance going on. And I use a method called punch and roll, so that means if I make a mistake, which... let's be real, I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to stop right then and go back and fix it. So a lot of stop and starting probably. We'll see, but it should be fun. So here we go. It's chapter 13. Chapter 13. Another counseling session that seemed to both fly by and drag painfully, culminating in little progress by the end of the hour. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as she glanced in the rearview mirror. Brett's truck was right behind her, headed to her house. Their counselor, Drew, had decided they needed a few more sessions with just the adults before introducing Tyler. Counselor Drew had decided they needed a few more sessions with just the adults before introducing Tyler into the mix. So they'd left him with a babysitter, since the Winslows were still in California. Most of today's session involved Drew trying to convince Brett it was much too soon to tell Ty about their true relationship. Brett argued, insisting Ty was mature. Brett argued, insisting Ty was a mature and sensitive kid who could handle the news. And then sometimes we have to pause to wait on traffic. Could handle the news. Emily tended to agree with Brett, but she was reluctant to dispute the opinion of a trained family counselor. After all, it was her brilliant parenting that had landed them all here in the first place. She did her best to focus on the discussion, but her mind kept wandering to the Josiah situation. And when she wasn't worrying about the boy ghost currently sharing their home, she was sharing their home, she was trying to decipher the strange message she'd received from Gail that morning. Since the Saturday morning soup fiasco, all her calls to Gail had gone to voicemail, with no return calls. Texts had been short and sporadic. She was terrified Gail and Brandon might be going through something similar to their imaginary friend problem. Could the same ghost haunt two places? Ty's account of Josiah suggested that the spirit preferred to stay at their home. However, he had traveled from the old jail to his new location. Maybe once he was attached to living people, he could just find them and materialize instantly. What did she know about how it worked? But although Brandon had been in the parking lot, he'd never actually entered the jail. It was that creepy conversation in the cordoned-off cell that started this whole thing. She was sure of it. At least, that was the start for them. However, the entire group had walked through the old Cobbs Hill Cemetery before they'd arrived at the jail. Perhaps Brandon had encountered something there. She really, really needed to talk to Gail about this. If it was happening to both of them, they could help each other figure it out. At the very least, she wanted to apologize to Gail for exposing the boys to this paranormal nightmare. It didn't seem like a discussion they could have via texts. So this morning, Emily had sent a fairly insistent message, begging Gail to find the time to talk to her in person. Since schools were closed this week for the April break, she couldn't try to ambush Gail during drop-off or pickup. She suggested a play date instead, at a location where the boys could play together out of earshot as they talked. Gail finally relented, agreeing to try to meet sometime next week when the boys were in school. Then she sent a final mysterious message. "Please stop calling." "Please stop texting and calling. It's making things worse." Emily turned the words over in her mind again as she pulled into her driveway. Maybe Gail's behavior had nothing to do with the ghosts of colonial boys. If so, they were caught in some major misunderstanding that wasn't being helped by the lack of communication. Cutting the engine, she pushed Gail's text out of her mind. Right now, she needed to focus on convincing Brett. He was taking additional time away from work to come back to her house, and she had to make him believe something she... No. Back to her house, and she had to make him believe something she could barely accept. But the only way to gain his help was to present a compelling case. Tyler's imaginary friend was a ghost named Josiah, and they needed to find a way to get rid of him. Despite their attempts to be quiet, their entrance woke Tyler from his nap. She silently hoped the real culprit wasn't their friendly ghost, whispering in his ear like some wake-up call from the supernatural world. It was just as well, she decided, as Brett took Brett with a T? Where am I? There we go. It was just as well, she decided, as Brett took Ty into the kitchen to pour him some milk. They deserved some time together. Digging through her purse, she pulled out her wallet to pay the babysitter. She calculated the hours in her head, added a tip, and handed a folded wad of bills to their sitter, Olivia. "Do you need a ride home?" Olivia's house was only a few blocks away, but she felt very protective of kids these days. At 13, Olivia still qualified in her book. A horrible thought suddenly struck her. What if the ghost attached itself to Olivia? Ty had claimed Josiah was 12, so a teenager would be a more logical choice. But nothing in Olivia's demeanor suggested she'd witnessed anything spooky. While Emily didn't exactly understand the rules of the great beyond, common sense told her not everyone could communicate with spirits. She'd always believed Tyler possessed abilities beyond those of a regular child. But she'd been thinking more along the lines of the kind that would land him in the gifted and talented classroom. Oh, breathing. But she'd been thinking more along the lines of the kind that would land him in the gifted and talented classrooms in elementary school, not an auditorium filled with desperate people seeking messages from late relatives. "No thanks," said Olivia, breaking into Emily's wildly racing thoughts. "My dad's home today. I texted him when I saw your car." "Oh, okay. Perfect. So, did everything go all right?" She searched Olivia's freckled face for signs of trauma. She smiled, revealing bright cobalt braces. "Everything was great. We played a little after lunch, and then I put him down for a nap. We read a few books first." "Hello?" a male voice called. Emily jumped, whirling toward the sound. Her heart slammed against her ribcage in a frenetic staccato beat. A head peered around the front door. Olivia's father. He lifted his brows. Nope. It's not what it says at all. His lifted brows indicated his shock at her reaction. "Sorry, it was open. I didn't mean to scare you." Right. She'd left the door cracked in the hope that Terrence, who'd greeted them at the steps, would venture inside. No such luck. "No, I'm just wound tightly." She managed a weak laugh. "Come on in." Stepping inside, Eric Tanner greeted his daughter. Then he turned to Emily, his forehead wrinkling with concern. "All okay?" She nodded with a bit too much enthusiasm. Eric was an... Sorry, there's a weird truck. All right. Right there. Eric was a nice guy, but she was in no mood for small talk. Her nerves really were shot, for a number of reasons, and she needed to have that discussion with Brett. "Maybe you need to go out. Do something fun?" he suggested, his tone edged with cautious hope. He scratched at his neatly trimmed beard. Her stomach flipped. Oh no, this was worse than small talk. Eric owned the little convenience store where she often stopped. Talk. Eric owned the little convenience store where she often stopped, and he was chatty with the regular customers. He'd told her recently his divorce had just been finalized. "I just need some sleep," she hedged. He didn't take her hint. "How about this Friday? I'm sure I could arrange for a sitter," he added with a wink. Brett strolled in, Tyler by his side. Positioning himself right next to Emily, he extended his hand. "Brett Leeds." Eric's gaze flicked between the two of them. He cleared his throat. "Eric Tanner." He shook Brett's hand as he tilted his head toward Olivia. "My daughter, Olivia." "Yes, we met. Your fantastic babysitter, right, buddy?" he asked Tyler, who was leaning against his camouflage-clad leg. The air around them felt charged, as though an electrical storm was brewing. Emily shifted her weight, willing a cohesive sentence to form on her lips. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you had company," Eric said, breaking the awkward silence. Brett lifted a shoulder. "No problem. I parked on the street in case Em needed to drive Olivia home." Her mind latched on to the use of the nickname. Here and there, Brett was letting the shortened version of her name slip into the conversation. A tiny hope. Nope. A tiny bud of hope bloomed in her chest every time he did it. She had to remind herself on a regular basis it was simply an old habit with little meaning. But this time, it sounded like a purposeful display of intimacy. Tyler saved them. With a few noisy slurps, he finished his milk. He lifted the plastic straw cup toward Brett. "Can I have more milk?" "Magic word," Emily responded automatically. This prompt seemed to restore her ability to speak. Where were her own manners? "So sorry, I should have done introductions. I've just been a bit overwhelmed with my work schedule lately. Unfortunately, they have me scheduled Friday night as well." She shook her head in a "what are you going to do" motion as she ushered Eric and Olivia toward the door. "I need to go get Ty more milk, but thanks again, Olivia." Once the Tanners were outside, she leaned against the closed door. What had happened to her normal, ordered life? Apparently, Brett had already decided to... Nope. Life. Apparently, Brett had already decided to take care of the milk situation. With a sigh, she pushed herself forward and headed for the kitchen. I hope this is okay. Brett screwed the plastic cap back on the cup. I figured more calcium can only be a good thing. She stared at him, too confused to speak. It's fine, she finally managed. You got the okay, buddy. Brett handed him the drink, then turned his attention to her, pinning her with an icy blue gaze. Is that someone you've been dating? Was he serious? Hysterical laughter bubbled in her throat. This was too much. She swallowed, fighting for composure. He's just a friend. No wedding ring. Her eyes darted to Ty, who was arranging letters on the fridge. And? Are you jealous or something? Just an observation. He followed his... I follow my arms all the time. He folded his arms across his chest and regarded her coolly. Desire surged through her, unexpected and unwelcomed. She dropped a hand onto Ty's silky head to steady herself. Let's go put on a show for you, honey. You're She caught herself at the last moment before Dad could slip out. What was the matter with her? The chaos and uncertainty in her life were seriously taking their toll. Brett and I need to talk about grown-up stuff. Scooping Ty up, she settled him on her hip. She could feel Brett's gaze boring into her back as she carried him out. He was washing out the coffee pot when she returned. I thought you might want a cup of coffee for this. She opened the fridge. Maybe something stronger. Pulling out 2 light beers, she held up the bottles. Care to join me? The corner of his mouth quirked up. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. He accepted the bottle as he pulled out a chair for her. We may as well sit. Emily sank gratefully into the chair, sliding the Lego structures into the corner. I realize what I'm going to... Nope. I realize what I'm going to suggest sounds absurd, but I need you to just listen, okay? Brett extended a hand in a go-ahead gesture as he took a pull from his beer. She blew out a breath, gathering her thoughts. I shouldn't have that much of a pause. She blew out a breath, gathering her thoughts. Okay, so I told you about the tour. That old jailhouse on Main Street? That's where we ended up. The guide said conditions were horrible and many people died there. It's supposedly haunted. Pausing for a sip, she evaluated his reaction. His expression remained neutral, but she sensed an underlying impatience. Clearly, he wanted to be spending his time here with Ty. She hurried on. Anyway, Ty slipped into one of the cells. They're roped off. And he was standing in the corner, talking to... no one. I'm sure now that's how this started. The next morning, he began the whole Josiah thing, telling me how this boy had farm animals, and how he doesn't understand modern things, like trains or cars or the television. These things scare him because he's from the past. Ty told his teacher that his friend was put to sleep underground, but he was lonely there. He missed his mom, I think. Don't you see? The spirit went back to the old jail where he apparently died, and he's been there ever since. Until recently, when Ty offered to share his mommy. And then this lost soul attached itself to our son. Or to share his mommy. And then this lost soul attached itself to our son. The final words tumbled out in a plaintive wail. Tightening her grip on the bottle, she took another generous swig to steady herself. Beads of perspiration popped up along her hairline, and she swiped her arm across her forehead. Truck again.
I don't know, Em. It seems really far-fetched.
I hear sounds. I see things. And the cat? Terrence is afraid of something in this house. Tyler talks to this Josiah, sometimes out loud, sometimes in his head. And then he suddenly knows things. Things a kid his age wouldn't know. He ran his fingers along the sides of his mouth.
You can't think of any possible rational explanations?
She pulled her gaze away from his lips, flushing. How could she get distracted by his looks when they were discussing something so serious? It was his fault for being... No, it does not need a pause. Oh, that's also the wrong spot. It was his fault for being so hot. She shrugged, picked at the raised letters of the glass bottle. Well, I guess the other possibility is I'm having a mental breakdown. And while I realize that would be a fun option to explore, I just really don't think I'm crazy.
I don't think you're crazy either. I just don't think Josiah is real.
The overhead lights flickered like a silent warning. She froze, gaping at him. Her heart fluttered in her chest, mimicking the lights with its own electrical bursts. He lifted his steady gaze toward the ceiling before turning it back on her.
Coincidence,
he said firmly. Tyler trotted into the kitchen, carrying the remote in one hand and the toy Air Force plane Brett had given him in the other.
Mommy, the TV is staticky.
Static? Because the power went out, honey. She shot a glance in Brett's direction as she pushed her chair back. I'll come fix it. Brett drained the last of his beer and stood as well.
Let's ditch the TV for now and have some playtime. What do you say, bud? We could use your Legos to build an aircraft carrier for your plane.
He squeezed her shoulder as he passed, sending a bolt of heat down her arm.
I'll think about everything you said, Em.
Sorry, that's the last sentence, so I think it needs a little more oomph.
I'll think about everything you said, Em.
And that's chapter 13. If you want the rest, you've got to wait till it's out and get the book. Bye, guys.